Welcome to the finale of the worst Dalek stories ever, because after this story, it's plain sailing and we'll begin looking at the best Dalek stories ever. I'd like to reiterate that this list is exclusively for the modern series of Doctor Who, so that's 2005 onwards. Why? It's not that I'm uninterested in classic Who, but put it this way, I've got some catching up to do with it. So let's recap the list so far. We're counting from worst to best. So, in first place is the worst Dalek story. We have Asylum of the Daleks, followed by Resolution in second place, The Witch is Familiar in third, and Evolution of the Daleks in fourth place. So in today's video we'll be looking at the fourth and fifth worst Dalek stories, along with a few dishonourable mentions. So in fourth place is Victory of the Daleks. Victory of the Daleks piqued my interest at the time of its release. For starters, its title is definitely something of intrigue. The Daleks actually winning? That's a first, but I thought they couldn't possibly win until everything else other than them is extinct. There's a lot of curiosity with a title like this, and to be fair, it does maintain quite a sense of intrigue, as an episode 2 for a bit, on top of the fact that it was the first Dalek story of the Stephen Moffat era. Daleks in World War II. How befitting of our metal Nazi bots. Except, these are no Daleks that we know. These are the Ironsides, as invented by Dr. Edwin Bracewell, and they're working for Winston Churchill and the British Empire to help defeat the Nazis. But the Doctor knows better and suspects that they're up to their old tricks. This premise is full of intrigue, and this alone offers the makeup of a potentially great Dalek story. The Doctor being painted as something of an antagonist, suspecting the worst in the Ironsides and going so far as to lose his temper and attacking them, in a great performance from Matt Smith. The Ironside Daleks are repainted Time War Daleks in khaki, and it's the best the Daleks have ever looked. And it's honestly very eerie to hear the sinister Dalek voice offering tea and refreshments, as well as pledging their allegiance to the British Empire. In a fit of unbridled rage, the Doctor attempts to force the Daleks to drop the innocent act by shouting, "I am the Doctor, and you are the Daleks." Getting the Doctor to yell this turned out to be the Daleks' plan here, because the three remaining Daleks are survivors from the Crucible, and are attempting to access a progenitor that will allow them to access a brand new race of pure Daleks. However, they need evidence that they are Daleks, as they are not pure Dalek, they're made of the DNA of Davros. This sounds like I'm making it up as I go along, but I'm actually not. They also mentioned that they manipulated Edwin Bracewell's mind to make him believe that he was the genius inventor of the Ironsides in order to infiltrate the British Empire. Okay, but I do have questions here. The fact that they're angry shouting murder bots isn't testimony enough for the progenitor, and yet the Doctor declaring their species is? And the progenitor just so happens to recognize this regeneration as the Doctor? Also, how are these Daleks actually impure? They're made from the DNA of Davros, which is surely about as Dalek as it gets. The scene where the Daleks reveal their true nature is very exciting and satisfying to see, as the Daleks begin being their murderous selves again. They kill two soldiers just for giggles before, I guess, they just beam themselves back up to their ship and make some new Daleks. But the Doctor of course gives chase, threatening them with a jammy dodger, which is pretending it's the TARDIS self-destruct, which theoretically the Daleks should be able to detect, considering they were able to identify Cybermen from their own data. The Daleks basically state that if the Doctor wants to threaten them any further, they'll return to their own time and begin their species anew themselves. The Doctor doesn't really have any choice in what's going to happen here. He wants the Daleks extinct, but he really has zero advantage in this situation, and is just stalling for time. However, time runs out, and they roll out 5 new pure Daleks in perhaps the most radical redesign the Daleks would ever receive. And boy, did they ever look ridiculous. Standing them alongside the Dalek Ironsides and a Time War Dalek wasn't the wisest plan in the world. So, for more information on what I think about this design, story-wise and look-wise, do check out my video on the new Dalek paradigm. Link is in the description below. A point I didn't mention in the aforementioned video is that there's a design element with these Daleks that I wasn't fond of at the time, but can now see a story-wise, based reason for. I really thought the Paradigm Daleks were a downgrade from the Time War Daleks because the nuts, bolts and functionality that made the Time War Daleks such an upgrade in the first place were completely absent in the new Paradigm Dalek design. Not a nut or bolt in sight. Back to the more rounded look of the classic Daleks in terms of functionality, which I saw as just a huge downgrade. But consider this. If we are to believe that the progenitor was a set of backup Daleks that has existed since the birth of the Daleks, I believe that's the implication anyway, it's not really explained, then it makes sense for the Daleks to not have the advanced look of the Time War Daleks, which is clearly the classic model but updated. But further questions: why did the Daleks not just go ahead and use the paradigm Daleks in the first place, if they're as powerful as the story likes to big them up to be? Why did they waste all that time staying in a confined city that they couldn't get out of because their casings are incompatible? Why did they get absolutely nerfed all these times? I feel like they really wanted to get this story right. A progenitor Dalek would have to be treated as a transitional design with the capability of rebuilding the Dalek race, but be recognized as a weaker form of Dalek. Then maybe he keeps the Crucible Daleks around until the race is properly restored. Another question though is, why is the progenitor just on this little scout ship? Would it not have been on the Crucible with the Supreme Dalek and Davros? Or did every scout ship have a set of progenitor Daleks, you know, just in case of emergencies? I won't lie, I quite like this episode, but the second half is all over the place. So the cinematography and directing in this whole sequence suffers a lot, and I believe that this is down to a poor choice of location. Rather than use the old Dalek saucer sets, they used a tobacco factory without sufficient room to really position the Daleks in any other formation, other than all stood side by side. And given that these ones came in different colours, it frankly made them look ridiculous, like a set of Power Rangers. The Paradigm Daleks use an energy beam on their saucer to force all of the power in the UK and to switch on during the Nazi bombings to allow the Nazis the advantage and for humanity to destroy itself. It's all really, really vague. Luckily for the Doctor, he's backed up by the best of humanity. I hated that line in Resolution. But basically, Edwin Bracewell has modified Spitfires with lasers so that they can fly in space and so they can disable the Dalek beams and defeat the Daleks. Okay, hang on. The Daleks made Bracewell believe he was an inventor, but why would they actually make him an inventor for real? Where did he even get these resources from in World War II England? Did he kit the Spitfires out with 100% Sheffield steel or something? This doesn't offend me as much as it does others though, as it is a cool and very exciting sequence, and the music is just about as British and triumphant as it gets. Bravo, Murray Gold. Fortunately, the beam is destroyed in the nick of time, but the Daleks have one final trick up their sleeves. Bracewell is a bomb. And this is where the episode really takes one up the rear, frankly. Amy manages to disable this bomb by triggering the emotion of the heartbreak and reminding him of his humanity. I have no idea how this works, and whether or not he's actually a scientist that the Daleks manipulated, or if he's just a robot at this point, or what. It's clear as mud and consistent as porridge. So where exactly is the victory of the Daleks? They attempted to help the Nazis destroy London, and failed. They attempted to blow up Bracewell, failed. Well, basically, the victory is they don't die. They head off somewhere else. Well, this is no more of a victory of the Daleks than evolution of the Daleks or Doomsday. I mean, there are still only 5 Daleks in existence here. It's pretty unclear as to how these guys are meant to create a whole new species. I guess they'd go on to in the end, but it's never really explained. So we started off with 3 remaining Daleks, and then the victory of the Daleks is that we now have 5 remaining Daleks who basically just gave up. Right, okay then, not really very deserving of its namesake. Victory of the Daleks gets a lot right, but it also fumbles in so many places. It just feels rushed, and definitely would have benefited from being maybe a 2-parter, so we could really think things through. When you actually think about it, it's really not that different from Evolution of the Daleks. A few remaining Dalek survivors make a last-ditch effort to evolve Daleks in a bid to save the species. The difference here is we don't have the great characters that are the Cult of Skaro. But at the same time, it does at least end up being far less of a waste than Evolution of the Daleks, and to its credit, the action sequences are exciting and the first half is brilliant. In 5th place is Time of the Doctor. I really struggle to determine as to whether or not Time of the Doctor should even be on this list, as the question still stands, is it actually a Dalek story? The Daleks may not have a particularly huge amount of screen time, nor are they the only enemy in the story. However, they do wind up being the main antagonist of the whole thing, so I'll count it. The stories I don't count as Dalek stories are the dishonourable mentions, so here we go with that. The Big Bang. I don't really count the Big Bang as a Dalek story because the Dalek is really more of an obstacle that pops up 3 times in the episode, but it's generally unimportant. It's just a catalyst to get the rest of the plot going, so why is it a dishonourable mention? Personally, I think this finale was a bit of an embarrassment. It's driven almost entirely by expositional dialogue, and when the Doctor's waving his sonic screwdriver around everywhere for the entirety of the episode, really doesn't help matters. Considering the setup we had with the Pandorica Opens, I was expecting kind of an intergalactic no man's land where the Daleks would turn on the other members of the Alliance and the Alliance would scatter, taking factions of a now crumbling universe, and it would be on Rory to gather the Doctor and his friends to save the universe or reboot it in the process. an idea a lot more perilous than what we got, although I will say that the third act of The Big Bang is spectacularly done, with the Doctor's speech to the little Amelia Pond and the wedding scene. It has a brilliant ending, it's just a shame about the rest. The next dishonourable mention is Day of the Doctor. This episode has a lot of good scenes in it, I'll give it that, and I appreciate the acting performances of David Tennant, Matt Smith, and John Hurt. However, this episode is just a disservice to Doctor Who's past and the Daleks. For starters, it's Doctor Who's movie-length 50th anniversary special, and the Daleks are a huge part of Doctor Who history, and yet they're playing second fiddle to the Zygons and appear in the episode for the best part of about 5 minutes, where they shoot a few guns around, killing nobody in a factually inaccurate Time War flashback. In The End of Time, the 10th Doctor described the Time War as a nightmare, full of atrocities from both sides, but what we see in Day of the Doctors is the final day of the Time War, and it's just a run-of-the-mill Dalek invasion on Gallifrey. Some shooty guns, some melodrama, and lots of explosions, but the Daleks aren't really treated as much of a threat. Heck, looking at this, the Doctor had no particular reason to actually blow up Gallifrey. Circumstances are no worse there than what we saw in, say, Stolen Earth. But then the entire conflict of the Russell T Davies era is evaporated when the Time War gets retconned out of existence anyway. Clara basically cries and says, "Think of the children!" And then the 3 Doctors decide to round up every Doctor to fly their TARDIS around Gallifrey to teleport it to a parallel pocket universe. Now the excuse for not trying this earlier is that there are multiple Doctors together. Okay, well, could the War Doctor not have consulted the other Doctors at that time, now that we're asking this? Okay, but this whole thing can be teleported by flying 13 TARDISes around the planet. Okay, so how many TARDISes are there on Gallifrey? Seriously, if it were this easy, I feel like somebody else would have considered it during the Time War. However, underwhelming. Say what you want about Russell T Davies and Chris Chibnall, they at least did not retroactively ruin other writers' stories. So back to Time of the Doctor. The Doctor must defend the planet Trenzalore from a barrage of enemies, including the Daleks. The Doctor fights to the very end of his life to protect the people of Trenzalore and discover the truth about the cracks in time, which turn out to be a message from the Time Lords asking, Doctor Who? The whole thing sounds more epic than it is, because much of the action and conflict is glossed over by narration by the end of it. And the Daleks, at the end, are the last enemies standing, and it comes to a showdown between a regenerating Doctor and the Daleks at the clock tower. Time of the Doctor doesn't really get anything too incorrectly when it comes to the Daleks, but I just think this story is all over the place. It can't really decide whether or not its primary focus is the Doctor, or Clara, or the people of Trenzalore, but I will say this, I do really actually quite like this episode. I like the friendships the Doctor makes along the way, I like the scenes with the Daleks taking over the papal mainframe, and I do like the Doctor's regeneration at the clock tower. I just wish it were the main regeneration that Matt Smith didn't get too. My issues with it are that we don't really see enough of the promised conflict between the monsters and villains, and they're just not treated as much of a priority here. We also get a really slapdash out of left field reason for the 11th Doctor to suddenly be considered the final Doctor. Most people never considered the Meta-Crisis Doctor to count as an actual regeneration, and it's annoying as a story like this could have felt really heart-wrenching along the way if we'd actually built up to it, as opposed to it just being a massive surprise sprung up in this story. Another gripe is that the whole crack in time subplot is explained by merely a line of dialogue. Come on, that's dull. Time of the Doctor for me is a very middling Doctor Who story. It's got all the dramatic performances and sideshow enemies that I watch Doctor Who for, but it just doesn't have the consistency or enough of any of it to back it up. It does at least repair the whole problem of the Daleks forgetting the Doctor after Asylum, in one episode, with one line of dialogue about the Daleks harvesting their memories of the Doctor from Tasha Lem of the Papal Mainframe. I mean, okay, we bottled out of the Dalek memory reboot and good on them for listening, but perhaps a little more of a road to this would have made it more worthwhile. Overall, not brilliant, but it does at least get the Daleks. So, what do you think of these episodes, and how would you rank the worst Doctor Who Dalek stories? Comment below and discuss. Next time, we'll be counting down the best Dalek stories of the modern era, and in the future, maybe even looking at some Cyberman stories. So, for the Doctor Who Rogues Gallery, you know who to subscribe to. Also, please do check out my 100th video spectacular. It's a video that's very close to my heart. It's like my usual ideas and analysis that you see in my videos, but it's in TV pilot form. So let me know what you think. Catch you next time, folks, and have a great day.